Okay, just 9 participants. At the beginning, if you have got any problem or question related to last session, you can ask. And if no question, I want you, one of you as a volunteer, to have a summary of last session's lecture. Who wants to have a summary of last session's lecture? Who is ready? Yes, Miss Inas. Your microphone is active, Miss Inas.
Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening.
Hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good evening, Doctor. Hear me, please?
Yes, I can hear you.
A regular dialect, also known as a regular to dialect, it is distinct form of a language spoken in a particular geographical area. If the form of speech transmitted from a parent to a child is a distance.
Miss Inas, I cannot hear you well. Miss Inas, it seems something wrong with your internet. I cannot hear you well.
That dialect is said to be the child vernacular. Hear me, please, Doctor?
I can hear you now, but
Exactly as network English. The accent associate with announces on the major television networks.
Miss Inas. Okay, it seems something wrong with the internet of Miss Inas. Okay, Miss Shima, can you give a summary of last session's lecture? Your microphone is active.
Yes, good afternoon, doctor. How are you?
Your voice is not clear.
Yes. Good afternoon, doctor. How are you? Can you hear me?
I'm good. Okay, thank you. But your voice, would you please speak louder?
What about now? It's okay?
Yeah, it's good. Yes, it's okay.
Yes. We talked about dialect and patois. Dialect describes different varieties of the same language. Sometimes these are regionally distinct, other times culturally distinct. Everyone has a dialect, but actually one dialect becomes prestigious by dint of its user prestige. Eventually, people adopt the attitude that this prestigious dialect is normal or standard, while other dialects or accents deviate from it. Patois usually is used to describe distinct language that lack the prestige of the national language. In France, where term originated is used to talk about Breton, all Satians, etc. These languages are at least as distinct from France, Italian, or German. In France, for example, patois also has strong continuation or backwards if they weren't real language. They are and always were. Country bumpkins use their patois while civilized folks France's the feeling was so strong it was internalized by speakers of the patois themselves. That attitude is recently starting to shift, at least among the patois speakers. In the Caribbean, the term used for describe local Creole language. I don't know if
Just
this
one
connotation there
example
is
is
positive
enough.
or negative.
Miss Yuma, just one
Yes,
example is
yes,
enough,
thank you.
okay? Okay, thank you
Yes,
very
thank
much.
you. Yes, thank you. Thank you. That's I have.
Okay, Mr. Osam, and you can give a summary.
Yes, Doctor, thank you very much for giving me a chance to express my summary here about the regional dialects. First of all, that we have varieties of regional dialects, and we can observe that in a variety in languages. First of all, that is affected by geographical areas. The geographical areas in which the language is spoken, and particularly if the language has been spoken in that area for hundreds of years. And that has been noticed differences in pronunciation or even in choices or in forms or in syntax, but the language is spoken is all over the geographical or the variations of the geographical areas in one language, but in different variations or in different dialects. That could be affected by pronunciation or by syntax, or it could be by, I'm not sure if it is affected by meaning or not, but I think by mostly pronunciation and syntax. So these variations, and in the absence of such traditions of writing that they called is pieties. Pieties is a kind of the dialect, or we call dialect pieties. Distinctions actually seems to make more sense in some situations. For example, as we said, as the previous examples given in France and in other situations or in other areas. And here mostly that pieties is related to the all societies or villages or more prestigious in dialect. Could be prestigious in dialect.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Okay, and now the rest of chapter 2, we will talk about it. The last thing that we talked about last session is regional dialects, and now we want to talk about social dialects. Okay, the term dialect can be used to describe differences in speech associated with various social groups or classes. There are social dialects as well as regional dialects. The study of regional dialects is somehow easier than studying social dialects because of the differences and different varieties exist in social dialects. An immediate problem is that of defining social group, okay, or social class. This is a problem in defining these two terms. And giving proper weight to various factors that can be used to determine social position, for example, occupation, place of residence, education. Okay, to which factors we can define these terms. It is according to new versus old money. It is according to income, ethnic origin, cultural background, or other factors. This is not something that that is agreeing with different sociolinguists. Such factors are, as these, appear to be related fairly directly to how people speak. There is a British, it's an example that there is a British public school dialect, and there is an African American vernacular English, or in short we call it AAVE dialect, found in cities such as New York, Detroit, or Buffalo. Many people also have stereotypical notions of how other people speak, and in particular there is considerable evidence from work of investigators such as Labov and Trotgill that social dialects can indeed be described systematically. Okay, whereas regional dialects are geographically based, social dialects originate among social groups and are related to a variety of factors, the principal ones apparently being social class or religion or ethnicity. These are the factors that define the social dialects. So in regional dialects we had different factors to define it, and one of the basic factors was geography. But in social dialects we have different other different factors That's the most important ones are social class, religion, or ethnicity. As a good example that your book mentioned is a city is mentioned in Baghdad. In a city like Baghdad, the Christian, Jewish, and Muslim inhabitants speak different varieties of Arabic. In this case, the first two groups use their variety solely within the group, but the Muslims' variety serves as a lingua franca or common language among the groups. So, Christians and Jewish people who deals with Muslims must use two varieties, their own at home and the Muslims' variety for trade and in all intergroup relationships. So we said that in Baghdad, there are different social varieties, one related to Christian, one related to Jewish, and one related to Muslim. Ethnic variation can be seen in United States as another example that is mentioned, where one variety of English has become identified with the ethnic group that is often referred to as African American Vernacular English, or in short, AAVE. Lebov's work in New York shows that there are other ethnic differences too. Speakers of Jewish and Italian ethnicity differentiate themselves from speakers of either standard variety or AAVE. On occasion, they actually show hypercorrective tendencies in that they tend to overdo certain imitative behaviors. For example, Italians are inclined to be in the vanguard of pronouncing words like bad and bag with a vowel resembling that of bird, and they pronounce bad as bird. And Jewish in the vanguard of pronouncing words like dog with with a vowel something like that of book, and they pronounce dog as dog. This is one example that is mentioned in United States and in New York City. Okay, Mr. Usam, you said that they use both depend on place and situation. Yes, of course. And Ms. Shima, it creates among social groups and are related to a variety of factors such as social class. Yes, these are the factors that we have in the definition of social variety or social dialect. Okay, and all these studies that exist in social dialects, when we want to study social dialects and social varieties, we call this branch of linguistics social dialectology. Okay, and regional dialectology is related to study regional dialects. But studies in social dialects confront many difficult issues, particularly when researchers venture into cities. Cities are much more difficult to characterize linguistically than rural areas. Variation in language and patterns of change are much more obvious in cities. For example, in family structure, in employment, in opportunities for social advancement, and also migration, both in and out of cities, is also a powerful and important linguistic factor. Cities also spread their influence far beyond their limits, and their importance should never be underestimated in considering such matters as standardization and diffusion of languages. These are two important factors that researchers should mention in their studies of social dialectology. And the next part of chapter 2 is related to styles register. The study of dialects is further complicated by the fact that speakers can adopt different styles of speaking. Okay, so styles, registers, and beliefs are something that is studied in social dialects. You can speak very formally or very informally. So in different circumstances, in different situations, you may use formal or you may use informal language. In ceremonial occasions, almost this situation require very formal speech. But in public situations, for example, in public lectures, you use less formal language. In casual conversation, you use informal language. In conversation between intimate friends, if you have a conversation with your intimate friend, you will use casual or colloquial form of language. We may try to relate the level of formality chosen to a variety of factors. So these factors are like the kind of occasion, the various social, age, and other differences that exist between the participants. The particular task that is involved, for example, in writing or speaking, the emotional involvement of one or more of the participants, and so on. So pay attention that these factors related to the degree or the level of formality. For example, in some situation, you may use this sentence, "What do you intend to do, Your Majesty?" Or in another situation, that is that when you speak to your intimate friend, you may use this sentence, "What do I intend doing, Rex?" This is an informal or casual speech that you use with your intimate friend. This is the style. This is the definition of a style. Okay, Ms. Shima, you said the style is a set of linguistic variants with a specific social meaning. Yes, of course. And the factors that I mentioned, you can add to this definition. And what about register? Registers are sets of language items associated with discrete occupational or social groups. Surgeons, airline pilots, bank managers, sales clerks, teachers, and different occupations may use different registers. You as a teacher may use some vocabulary, some terminology that is special to teachers. Surgeons and doctors may use another vocabulary and another terminology to show the registers. Okay, let me, I forgot to record this meeting. For example, Ferguson 1994 says people participating in recurrent communication situation tend to develop similar vocabularies, similar features of intonation, and characteristic bits of syntax and phonology that they use in this situation. And so this kind of variety is a register. So it is a kind of variety that are among discrete or special occupation. Ferguson also said that it's a special terms for recurrent objects and events, and formulaic sequences or routines seem to facilitate speedy communication. Other features apparently serve to mark the register, establish feelings of rapport, and serve other purposes similar to accommodation that influence dialect formation. There is no mistaking There strong tendency for individuals and communicators to develop register variation along many dimensions. And of course, one person may control a variety of register. You may have different situation. You may have one as a, for example, teacher, or as the, for example, stock broker. You can use different registers with your friends. And each register helps you to express your identity at a specific time or place. Okay, dialect, style, and register differences are largely independent. We can talk casually about mountain climbing in a local variety of a language, or you can write a formal technical study of winemaking. You may also be judged to speak better or worse than other speakers who have much more much more same background. So you can see that these terms and these concepts are independent to each other. Dialect, style, and register. Okay, different varieties is interesting in still another respect. While each of us may have productive control over only a very few varieties of a language, we can usually comprehend many more varieties and relate all of these to the concept of single language. This is our receptive linguistic ability is much greater than our productive linguistic ability. So, our receptive linguistic ability is much greater than our productive linguistic ability. An interesting problem for linguists is knowing how best to characterize this knowledge that we have, which enables us to recognize something as being in the language, but yet marked as different in some way. This is something that is somehow difficult for a sociolinguist. Okay, this is for chapter 2, or the first chapter that we cover. If you have got any problem or something that I should explain more, you can ask. And if no, we can talk about the next chapter. No problem. Okay, the last idea, you mean the receptive language. Our receptive linguistic ability is much greater than our productive linguistic ability, because we can understand many different situations that we may not produce it well. Okay, so what is important for a linguist is to characterize the knowledge, our receptive knowledge versus our productive knowledge. This is something challenging for a sociolinguistics to study the receptive linguistic ability of the speakers. Did you get? It is somehow our competence versus the performance. The study of performance is much more easier than the study of competence. Okay, and as your assignment, as your task for this session, or let's say for next session, I asked you to summarize this chapter. I mean, chapter 2, the chapter that we cover now. Okay, summarize it. Please do not just copy and paste. I don't want to copy and paste something in a piece of paper. Okay, don't do that, please. Just understand, just what you understand. Read a part, study one part, and Okay, and ask yourself what I understand of this part, and write what you understand, not just copying and pasting something in a piece of paper. Okay, you can do it in a chapter 2, Miss Darma, chapter 2, just chapter 2. And also the project that I gave you to do, the projects that I asked you to summarize some chapters with your friend, with your partner. Please pay attention that I don't want you to just copy the terms and copy the subjects and paste it in the PowerPoint parts. No, just what you understand. This is the summary. The summary means that something that have not someone that have not the opportunity to study the book. If he or she study your summary, can understand all the subjects of that book. Okay, this is the aim of the summary, or the aim of important points. Just hint and just write important points. So yes, Ms. Chima, this is your assignment. Summarizing chapter 2 is your assignment for next session. You have 1 week to do it. You must write the summary. Yes, summarize all chapter 2, but do not copy and paste it. Okay, just write what you understand. Important points. Just write the important points and explain it very, very briefly in your own language, not in the language of the book. Okay, I want the language of you yourself. Okay, thank you. And now let's talk about the next chapter. Mr. Osam, which chapter? Okay, I asked you to summarize and paraphrase chapter 2, not chapter 3. Now I want to talk about chapter 3. I don't want you to summarize it. You will summarize it, you will paraphrase it after we finish chapter 3, okay? Now for your next assignment, for your next session assignment, you just paraphrase and summarize chapter 2. Okay? And the next chapter is Pigeons and Creoles. What do you know about pigeons and creoles? Have you ever heard pigeons and creoles? Birds? No, it's not related to birds. If you want to speak, your microphone is active. You can raise your hand and I can active your microphone. Ms. Rasha, it is the use of language that understand both parties? No. If you're writing, if you're texting, takes time, you can speak. Various lingua franca, we can say sometimes in their previous history, yes, they were used as a lingua franca. It is a simplified language. In their history, yes, this is the viewpoint of some people, that they say that Pidgins and Creoles were simplified language, but not nowadays. Now, as a sociolinguistic viewpoint, we cannot say that Pidgins and Creoles are simplified language. Okay, we'll start this chapter. Among many languages of the world, there are a few often assigned to a somewhat marginal position: the various lingua francas, Pidgins, and Creoles. These are three concepts that some people may say that these are marginal languages, and marginal languages means that they are not as important as other languages. The story of serious study of such languages goes back only a few decades, and because of circumstances of their use, they have often been regarded as being of little intrinsic value or interest. Until recently, Pidgins and Creoles have generally been viewed as uninteresting linguistic phenomena, being notable mainly for linguistic features they have been said to lack. They may lack articles, lack copula, lack grammatical inflection, rather than those they have possessed. And those who speak them have often been treated with disdain and even contempt. So because of the speakers of these languages are underestimated, these languages are called marginal. Okay, copula. Who can answer Mr. Osam that what is copula? No one? Mr. Osam, copula verbs are are a kind of verb, okay, that relate subject to the complement. In Persian we call it rapti. I don't know, you have this concept in Arabic, rapti. It means that it's connect subject to the complement. For example, was, were, am, is, are. These are copula verbs. Did you get Mr. Osam? Of copula verbs? Okay, so it means that these languages, I mean Pidgins and Creoles, lack copula and lack article. They don't use articles in their language. They don't use copula. They don't use grammatical inflection in their language, okay? Okay, Himes 1971 has pointed out that before the 1930s, Pidgins and Creoles were largely ignored by linguists, who regarded them as marginal languages. So marginal languages means unimportant languages. And some linguists were even advised to keep away from studying them, lest they jeopardize their careers. He points out that Pidgins and Creoles are marginal in the circumstances of their origin and in the attitude toward them on the part of those who speak one of these languages from which they derive. They are also marginal in terms of knowledge about them, even though these languages are of central importance to our understanding of language and central too in the lives of some millions of people, because nowadays there are many Pidgins and Creoles in the world. So we cannot ignore it, and we cannot ignore studying them as a linguist. Is it out of standardization? We as a sociolinguists people, we can say no, it is not out of standardization. But if you ask the viewpoint of common people, yes, they said that Pidgins and Creoles are out of standardization. Let me talk about a summary of Pidgins that refresh your mind, okay? Some years ago, when Chinese people wants to trade American people, they cannot understand English, and also English people or American people cannot speak Chinese. So Chinese people have to understand and have to study English. But because they couldn't, they were no class or they were no institute to teach them English, they use a simplified English, okay? This simplified English lacks copula, lacks grammatical articles, and lacks grammatical inflections. For example, and instead of this sentence, I saw an old man yesterday. They may say, I see old man. Just this, okay? This is a simplified language. I see, and instead of I saw, they may say I see old man without pronouncing articles. And after some years, when pigeons reveal or let's say extend to other people, when a man wants to marry to a woman without any common language, they use pidgin, okay? And when their child and when they give birth to a child, they speak that pidgin to that language, to that child, and this child teach his next generation that language. This is what the spread, the expression or the spread of pigeons to Creole. Did you get? This is the very short summary of what happened to pidgin and Creole. Okay. Okay, wait a minute. Let me share. Okay, wait a minute. Let me share a file in order for you to understand better Pidgins and Creole as an introduction, and then we will talk about this chapter. Okay, let me. I want to find a file that helps you to better understanding of Pidgin and Creole as an introduction. Okay, can you see this picture, Pigeons and Creoles? Can you see this picture that I shared you? Okay, this is an introductory factor related an introduction to pigeons and creoles. Please study this and then we will turn to our original book. A pidgin is a variety of a language that developed far from practical purpose, such as trading among groups of people who had a lot of contact but who didn't know each other's language. So as I told you, when two or 300 years ago, when Chinese people went to United States for the aim of trading, they didn't understand English, and also English people or American people cannot understand Chinese. So these Chinese people, for the sake of trading, they have a lot of contact with Americans, and they developed a new language that they call it simplified English. It would have no native speaker. Pay attention that pigeons have no native speakers. This is a kind of artificial language. Okay, this is a kind of artificial language. A pidgin is described as an English pidgin if English is the lexifier language that is the main source of words in the pidgin. It doesn't mean that those words will have the same pronunciation or meaning as in the source. For example, the word grass, as you can see, has its origins in the English word grass. But in Turk Pisin is one of the pidgins. In Turk Pisin, it also came to be used for hair. It is part of musk race or mustache. Okay, and grass belong. It means bird. When a pidgin develops beyond its role as a trade or contact language and becomes the first language of a social community as a result of marriage among different groups, it is described as a creole. So, a creole initially develops as a first language of children growing up in a pidgin-using community and becomes more complex as it serves more communicative purposes. The separate vocabulary elements of a pidgin can become grammatical elements in a creole. The form by and by you go, it means by and by you go. In early Turk Pistin gradually shortened to by you go and finally to you be go, with a grammatical structure not unlike that of its English translation equivalent, you will go. Okay? Did you get an introduction of what is creole and what is pidgin? Did you get? Okay, so let me share our original text. Okay, we return to our original text. Fortunately, in recent years, such attitudes have changed and as serious attention have been given to pidgins and creoles. Linguists have discovered many interesting characteristics about them, characteristics that appear to bear on fundamental issues to do with all languages, or fully fledged and marginal like. So they didn't call it marginal or fully fledged language. They study these forms or these varieties as a complete language. Pidgins and creoles are invaluable to those who use them. Not only are they essential to everyday living, but they are also frequently important markers of identity. The study of pidgins and creoles has become an important part of linguistic and especially sociolinguistic study with its own literature and of course its own controversies. So the study of pidgins and creoles are far more important for linguists. With pidgins and creoles, we can see processes of language origin and change going on around. We can also witness how people are attracted to languages, how they use what linguistic resources they have, and how they forge new identities. We do not have to wait a million to see how a language changes. A few generations suffice to see how these pidgins and pidgins change to creole. To some extent, the speakers of such languages have benefited as more and more of them have come to recognize that what they speak is not just a bad variety of this language, or that but a language or a variety of a language with its own legitimacy. It means with its own history, with its own structure, with its own area of function, and the possibility of winning eventual recognition as a proper language. So nowadays, linguistics do not call these kind of languages as a marginal language, but a proper language. Okay, Mr. Osam, this part is finished. Okay, you can have your question, Mr. Osam. I can hear you.
About pigeons and crows. So as you said,
Yes.
it is well acceptable despite its being bad language, that it lacks so many items. It could be, as you said, that is used between Chinese and American, especially whenever they want trading, and they are not supplied of classes, or maybe because there are no supplies of teachers to teach them English very well. So they use English, or they use bad language as in English just for trading. You know, this is in general. But my question, what does it lack? Does it lack only grammar? Or my question also, it's lacking, but it's functional grammar. Oh, sorry, it's functional language. You
Yes,
understand what I mean? So
okay,
it is
of course.
functional,
This is what.
but despite the lacks of some items. My question, what does it lack beside grammar? If it lacks grammar, you know, it's acceptable. But if it lacks pronunciation or syntax, I don't know, Doctor. Thanks a lot.
Okay, the pronunciation is somehow different from its original. As you can see, the grass. Let me write it.
GRAS.
Yes, GRAS. This is for grass. Okay, they call it grass. They pronounce it grass, not grass in Turk piscine. And also, instead of pronouncing by and by, they may pronounce it by and be. Okay, so their pronunciation is different from the original pronunciation. Of course, their pronunciation is different. Let me say that their pronunciation is somehow simplified form of English.
Doctor, what's the difference? Only in pronunciation and grammar, or there are some other items? This is my question. What else?
Okay, other items that common people may say is that their ethnicity of that people who use it are not good. They may say that, okay, this is the language of slaves. They may say that,
Definitely.
okay? This is the language. Because of this, it is not good, and it is a bad language. They use bad language because they said that the slaves use bad language, and we as a linguist should not study this kind of language. But
Uh,
nowadays, our viewpoint as a linguist is completely different from this, and we said that these languages have a history, have different varieties, have its own structure. Us as a linguist, so it is a proper language, and we should study it.
So it's a proper language nowadays. It is studied nowadays. It's acceptable language.
Yes.
But you know, doctor, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to disturb you here or my colleagues. Just one point here. You know that European people, especially the native speaker, whenever you speak with them in this language, I don't know. This is the first time I know it. That is pigeons and scroll. If it is lacking so many bad pronunciation or bad vocabularies, bad grammar, they will never accept it.
Okay.
They call it pop language.
Okay,
They call it pop.
this is the viewpoint of the native language, the native speakers
That's
of
right.
English, because those
That's right.
people cannot pronounce that word good. They may say that they pronounce it bad. Okay, this is the viewpoint of English people. This is not the viewpoint of the speakers of Pidgin. We just pronounce it good. This is not the viewpoint of speakers of Pidgin. This is the viewpoint of native speakers. Native
That's right.
speakers of English.
Thank
Okay. And now, the next is related to Franco. Have you ever heard about lingua franca, and can you make some examples of lingua franca? Languages as the lingua franca. Yes, if you want to speak, you can raise your hand and I can activate your microphone. And if you want to write, please write. What is lingua franca? Have you ever heard something about lingua franca? Okay, suppose the situation that, suppose our situation, okay? Suppose our situation. Your native language is what? Arabic. Native language, you cannot speak Persian, and I myself cannot speak Arabic. So we have to choose one common language to communicate with each other. So we choose English as our lingua franca. Here, in our communication, in our contact, English is our lingua franca because we use as our. Did you get? What is lingua franca? Mr. Osam, would you please off your phone? There's some noise. Okay, Miss Shima. Miss Shima, your microphone is active. Mr. Osam, I ask you please make your microphone off, okay? Mr. Osam, can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you, Miss Shima.
Yes, can you hear
Thank
me?
you.
Is a language of mixture of languages to medium of communication by people whose native language are different. It's from the Italian language and is also known as a trade language, contact language, international language, and global language. This term, the term English as a lingua franca, refers to the teaching, learning, and use of English language as a common means of communicative language.
Thank you very much. Have you ever heard something about the etymology of lingua franca? What is the etymology of lingua franca. Have you ever heard about the etymology of lingua? Lingua, it's awkward because at that time, some years ago, French was the international language, and people who wants to use a mediator, a medium language to understand each other, they use French as their international language. Language, the language of France or language of French. So this is the etymology. But now it's French. It is called to all languages as a mediator. That we use it as a mediator. Maybe English, maybe it is Persian, maybe it is Arabic or any other language. Okay, let's talk and turn back to our lingua franca. Not Mr. Mohammed Saleh. We do not mix two language. We use, okay, for example, our native language is Arabic. My native language is Persian. I cannot speak Arabic and you cannot speak Persian. So we choose one common language that I and you can understand it. So English is a language that you and I commonly can understand and can speak. So we use English as our lingua franca, okay? Okay, and lingua franca. People who speak different languages, who are forced into contact with each other, must find some way of communicating a lingua franca. In a publication concerned with the use of vernacular languages in education published in Paris in 1953, UNESCO defined a lingua franca as a language which is used habitually by people whose mother tongue are in order to facilitate communication between them. A variety of other terms can be found which much the same phenomena. For example, Submarine, 1968, lists 4 of these phenomena. A trade language, for example, Hausa in West Africa or Swahili. Contact language, for example, Greek Koine. An international language, for example, English throughout much of our contemporary world. An auxiliary language, for example, Esperanto. They usually develop as a consequence of population migration or for purposes of trade. Still, another kind of lingua franca is a mixed language. So, mixed language is one kind of consequence of publication migration, whether it is forced or voluntary. For example, Bakar describes one such language. Michif is a mixture of Cree and French. It is the lingua franca, but at the same time, it is the mixed language of Cree and French, spoken mainly in Canada by 1,000 people of Métis. Michif is sometimes characterized as a language that mixes Cree verbs and French nouns, but probably more accurately is one that uses Cree grammar and French vocabulary. So they create another language by mixing Cree grammar with French vocabulary. It is a clear marker of group identity for those who use it and emerge to express a new ethnic identity, mixed Cree and French. A new language was needed to express that identity. The most obvious way to form a new language was through mixing the two community languages. So, as an example, at one time, Greek Koine and Volga is the lingua franca. They were in widespread use as lingua francas in Mediterranean world and much of Europe. Sabir was a lingua franca of Mediterranean, originating in the Middle Ages and dating back at least to the Crusades. It survived into the 20th century. In other parts of the world, Arabic, Mandarin, Hindi, and Swahili have served and do serve as lingua francas. Arabic was a lingua franca associated with the spread of Islam. Today, English is used in very many places and for many purposes as a lingua franca, for example, in travel and often trade and commerce as international language. A lingua franca can be spoken in a variety of ways. Although both Greek Koine and Volga Latin served at different times as lingua francas in ancient world, neither was a homogeneous entity. Not only were they spoken differently in different places, but individual speakers varied widely in their ability to use the language. Today, English serves as for some speakers it is a native language. For example, for people live in North America. For others, a second language. For example, in Hindustan, in Bangladesh, as a foreign language, Iran. So that is one affected linguistic interference. To some extent, if the lingua franca was used for many years between two groups, they may affect some vocabularies of each languages. For example, as you see about the Michif, it is a mixed language of Cree and French. It is a mixing language because it takes the vocabulary of French and it takes the grammar of Cree. But English, no, it's not affected by different languages that use it. Okay, in North America, Chinook jargon was used extensively as a lingua franca among native people of Northwest from British Columbia into Alaska during the second half of the 19th century. Speakers of English and French also learned it. Today, Chinook jargon is virtually came from various sources, principally Nootka, Chinook, Chahalis, all Amerindian languages, and French and English. Okay, that's enough for today. We talked up to page 61. Okay, I repeat it again. Session science. I would summarize issue 2. And this paraphrasing, this summarizing, I don't want you to just copy and paste some terms and some sentences. No, please read one part and please study one part and write what you understand in your own language, in your own expression, in your own writing form, okay? And thank you for your attendance. If you have got any problem or any question, we can leave the class. Not on the platform. Please send it on, yes, on the platform. Please send it on platform. Okay, somebody said how pigeons develop. When, for example, suppose a man, okay, a man speak